There's a mindset that separates traders who last a decade from traders who last 18 months. And it has nothing to do with strategy, risk management, or even psychology in the way you've heard it discussed 1,000 times. It's boredom tolerance, your ability to sit still, do nothing, and feel completely unbothered by it. And most traders don't just lack this skill, they've never even heard it named as a skill, which means they've spent years fighting a battle they didn't know existed. Here's the claim that's going to sound insultingly simple. The traders making consistent money are on any given day mostly bored out of their minds, not stimulated, not thrilled, bored. Meanwhile, the traders blowing up accounts are often the ones who feel most alive at their desks, chart watching with the kind of intensity usually reserved for something that actually requires it. Today, I'm going to show you exactly why the ability to tolerate boredom is worth more than any indicator, any strategy, or any amount of market knowledge you could ever accumulate. You already know this feeling. You set an alert, you have a plan, and you tell yourself you'll wait for your setup. Then, 20 minutes pass. The chart just sits there, drifting sideways, doing absolutely nothing interesting. And something in your chest starts to itch. You open a second tab, you start scanning other symbols. You tell yourself you're staying sharp, but really you're just looking for anything to click on. You've probably also lived the aftermath of that itch. You took a trade that wasn't actually your setup, just something that looked vaguely tradable, because sitting still had become unbearable. It didn't work. Of course it didn't. It was never really a trade. It was a scratch for an itch wearing a trade's clothing. You know the feeling of watching that position bleed red while quietly knowing, somewhere underneath the hope, that you already knew better. You're not undisciplined in the way you think you are. You've probably got a written trading plan, you can probably recite your own rules from memory, and you still keep ending up here taking trades your own plan would have rejected, simply because the alternative was sitting with nothing to do. So what's actually happening? It's not your strategy. It's not your risk management, at least not directly. It's not even impatience in the way people usually describe it. The real villain is something more specific. Your nervous system has been trained by years of modern life to treat stillness as a problem that needs solving. Trading doesn't create this wiring. It just exposes it, mercilessly, hour after hour, in a way almost no other activity does. The 95% experience boredom as a discomfort to escape. The 5% experience boredom as a signal that the system is working correctly. Let me introduce you to two traders. Call them David and Karen. David works in software. Fast-paced job, constant notifications, a brain that's been conditioned for 15 years to associate doing something with being valuable. When David started trading, he brought that same wiring to the charts. He couldn't just sit and watch a level approach. He needed to be doing something the entire session. So he built himself a dashboard with 11 different indicators, 3 time frames, and a running scanner across 40 symbols. It looked and felt incredibly sophisticated. What David had actually built was a boredom avoidance machine disguised as an analysis tool. Every flicker on that dashboard gave his brain a tiny hit of stimulation, a reason to feel like something important was happening. He wasn't finding more setups, he was finding more excuses to act. Because sitting quietly in front of a chart that wasn't moving felt, to him, almost physically uncomfortable. Over 8 months, David's trade count exploded. He went from a plan that called for roughly 3 to 5 trades a week to a reality of 3 to 5 trades a day. His win rate on the real setups, the ones that matched his actual plan, stayed reasonably solid. But those trades got buried under a mountain of impulse trades, taken purely to fill the silence. By the end of the 8 months, the impulse trades had quietly eaten almost all the profit the good trades had generated, and then some. David didn't have a strategy problem. He had a stillness problem, and it was costing him real money every single week. Now Karen. Karen works as a hospital administrator, a job that, in her words, taught her to spend long stretches of a shift simply waiting, watching, and doing nothing until something actually required her attention. When Karen started trading, she brought that same waiting room patience with her. Her plan called for 1 to 3 trades a week, sometimes fewer. Most days, she opened her charts, checked her levels, saw that nothing had happened, and closed the platform. That was it. That was the entire session. Karen wasn't smarter than David. Her strategy wasn't more sophisticated. If anything, it was simpler, with fewer conditions and fewer indicators. But Karen had something David didn't: an unusually high tolerance for sitting inside boredom without needing to convert it into action. On the days nothing happened, nothing happened. She didn't scan other symbols, looking for a consolation trade. She didn't add a new indicator to feel more engaged. She just waited the way she'd waited through 1,000 quiet hours at a nurse's station, trusting that when something actually needed her attention, it would be obvious. Over that same period, Karen's account grew steadily, not explosively, but steadily, because her results reflected her actual edge instead of her actual edge plus a constant tax of impulsive, boredom-driven trades. Same markets, same volatility, same information available to both of them. The difference wasn't intelligence, and it wasn't even strategy. The difference was that Karen could sit in a room with nothing happening and feel completely fine about it. And David couldn't. So why does this happen? Why do capable, disciplined people keep converting boredom into unnecessary action? There are 5 forces at work, and once you can name them, you'll start recognizing them in your own trading sessions. The first is what I'll call the stimulation debt. Modern life has trained most people's nervous systems on a near-constant drip of notifications, updates, and micro-rewards. Your brain has quietly recalibrated its baseline expectation for how often something interesting should happen. When the market goes quiet, which it does, constantly, for hours at a time, your brain doesn't interpret that as normal. It interprets it as a deficit that needs to be corrected. And the fastest way to correct it is to click a button and open a position. The second force is productivity guilt. Most traders carry a subtle belief that if they're not actively doing something, they're not really working, and if they're not working, they don't deserve the outcome. Sitting and watching a chart do nothing feels, to this part of the brain, like slacking off. So the trader manufactures activity, new indicators, extra trades, constant tab switching, purely to feel like the effort matches the ambition. The 95% confuse motion with progress. The 5% understand that the highest value action, most of the time, is no action at all. The third force is what I call narrative starvation. Every trader, whether they admit it or not, wants a story to tell. "I called this move" is a more satisfying sentence than "I sat there and watched nothing happen for 4 hours." Boredom doesn't produce stories. Impulsive trades, win or lose, produce stories. So the brain, hungry for a narrative worth repeating, keeps pushing toward action, even when the plan says wait. The fourth force is the false urgency of opportunity cost. When a trader sits through a quiet session, some part of the brain keeps whispering that somewhere else, on some other symbol, something exciting is happening right now, and by sitting still, they're missing it. This feeling is almost always false, because the market produces far more noise than genuine opportunity, but the feeling doesn't care about that. It just generates a persistent, low-grade anxiety that something is being missed, and that anxiety gets resolved, wrongly, by taking action. The fifth force is emotional understimulation masquerading as intuition. After enough hours of boredom, some traders start to feel a kind of restless hunch, a sense that something's about to happen, and they mistake that restlessness for market intuition. Occasionally, they're right, purely by chance, and that one correct guess gets remembered far more vividly than the dozen times the same restless hunch led nowhere. The mind builds a false track record for a feeling that was never actually predictive. There's a sixth force worth naming on its own because it's sneakier than the other 5. Identity substitution. Somewhere along the way, a lot of traders stop identifying as someone who executes a selective edge and start identifying as someone who trades the market. That second identity needs constant proof of itself. It needs to be at the desk, needs to be clicking, needs the market's attention returned in kind, almost like a relationship that requires constant contact to feel real. A trader anchored to the first identity doesn't need any of that. Their sense of self as a trader isn't threatened by 4 quiet hours. Because their job was never to be busy, it was only ever to execute, rarely and well. Here's the part that should genuinely change how you think about your own trading sessions. Boredom isn't a bug in your process. It's the natural, expected byproduct of having a selective, disciplined strategy. If your strategy only trades genuinely high-quality setups, and those setups are rare by design, then the vast majority of your screen time should, mathematically, be uneventful. A trader who feels engaged and stimulated for 6 straight hours of market watching, session after session, isn't more skilled. They're almost certainly trading a plan that's far looser than they think it is, generating far more signals than a truly selective edge would ever produce. Think about how professional risk managers, the people responsible for enormous pools of institutional capital, actually spend their days. Their best days are, by their own description, uneventful. Positions sit quietly within their risk limits. Nothing dramatic happens because dramatic is usually expensive. The entire profession is built around the assumption that if you're feeling a lot of excitement at your desk, something has probably gone wrong. Not right. Retail traders rarely hear this because boredom is the goal, doesn't sell courses, and doesn't get clicks. But it's exactly how the most disciplined capital in the world is actually managed. So let's talk about the shifts. Not vague advice to be more patient. Specific, mechanical changes to how you handle the quiet hours. Shift 1. Redefine what a successful trading session looks like before you sit down. A session where you took 0 trades because nothing met your criteria is not a wasted session. It's a session where the plan worked exactly as designed. Write this down, literally, somewhere you'll see it every time you open your platform. No trade is a valid outcome. Say it before every session until it stops feeling like a consolation prize and starts feeling like the standard. Shift 2. Separate screen time from decision time. You don't need to be staring at a live chart for 4 hours to catch your setup. Set alerts at your actual entry levels and give yourself explicit permission to walk away from the screen entirely between alerts. If your alert hasn't triggered, there is nothing for you to be doing. The moment you allow yourself to leave the chart during quiet periods, you remove the entire mechanism that converts boredom into impulsive clicking because you're simply not present for the itch. Shift 3. Build a boredom log alongside your trade log. Every time you feel that restless urge to act on something that isn't your actual setup, write it down instead of clicking it. Note the time, what you almost did, and what actually happened in the market afterward. Most traders discover, after a few weeks of this, that the vast majority of their almost trades would have lost money or at best broken even after costs. Seeing this in your own data, in your own handwriting, is far more convincing than hearing it from a stranger on a screen. Shift 4. Create a genuinely separate outlet for stimulation that has nothing to do with your trading account. If part of you is craving action, engagement, and a sense of something happening, build that into your life somewhere else. A hobby, exercise, a side project, anything with its own reward loop that doesn't put your capital at risk. Traders who try to get all their stimulation from the market end up unconsciously manufacturing volatility in their own trading behavior just to feel something. Give that need somewhere else to live, and the market stops having to serve as your entertainment system. Shift 5. Measure yourself weekly on adherence to your criteria, not on trade count. At the end of each week, ask a single question. Of the trades I took, how many actually met my written setup conditions? A week with 2 trades and 100% adherence is a better week than a week with 12 trades and 40% adherence, regardless of which week happened to make more money. Outcomes in the short term are noisy. Adherence to a sound process is the only thing you can actually control, week after week. Shift 6. Practice sitting in discomfort on purpose. Outside of trading. This sounds unrelated, but it isn't. Boredom tolerance is a general nervous system skill, not something unique to markets. Spend time, deliberately, doing genuinely boring things without reaching for a phone to fill the gap, standing in a line, waiting for water to boil, sitting in a waiting room. Every time you let a boring moment pass without manufacturing stimulation, you're training the exact same muscle you'll need the next time a trading session goes quiet for 3 hours. Shift 7. Rewrite your own identity statement and read it before every session. Not, I trade the market. Something closer to, I wait for rare, specific conditions and execute them well, and everything in between is not my job. It sounds almost too simple to matter. It matters enormously, because the sentence you tell yourself about what your job actually is will quietly shape whether 4 quiet hours feels like failure or feels like exactly what was supposed to happen. This is where the identity shift happens, and it's bigger than any single rule. Most traders think their job is to watch the market. That's actually the easy, comfortable, familiar part, the part that feels like effort. The real job, the job that separates the trader who's still solvent in 10 years from the one who isn't, is tolerating enormous stretches of nothing without needing to convert that nothing into risk. When you stop measuring your worth as a trader by how much screen time and mental energy you poured into a session, and start measuring it by how well you protected your capital during the hours where nothing worthwhile was happening, everything downstream changes. Your trade count drops, your average trade quality rises, your relationship with the empty hours stops being adversarial. There's a version of you sitting at a desk right now, 11 browser tabs open, 3 indicators added just this week, feeling productive, engaged, and sharp. And there's a version of you who closes the laptop after setting 2 alerts and goes for a walk, feeling, by comparison, almost lazy. The uncomfortable truth is that the second version is almost always the one compounding capital 3 years from now, while the first version is still adding indicators, still feeling busy, and still wondering why the account isn't growing despite all that obvious effort. Now let's talk about the boring truth, because this is the part nobody wants to hear, and it's the whole point of this video. If your trading sessions feel exciting, stimulating, or engaging on a regular basis, that is not a sign that you're doing something right. It's very likely a sign that your strategy has quietly loosened, that your definition of a setup has expanded to include far more of the chart than it originally did, simply because the tighter version of your plan wasn't giving your nervous system enough to chew on. Professional traders, the ones managing genuinely large amounts of capital for a living, describe long stretches of their day in almost apologetic, unglamorous terms. Watching, waiting, checking levels that haven't moved, nothing story-worthy, nothing that would make an interesting clip. And that flatness, that emotional nothing, is precisely the environment in which a real edge is allowed to play out undisturbed by unnecessary interference. There's another comparison worth sitting with here: the sniper versus the soldier laying down constant fire. Constant fire feels active, feels like you're doing your part, feels like effort is being expended in proportion to the danger. A sniper, by contrast, can spend an entire day in one position, unmoving, doing what looks from the outside like absolutely nothing, waiting for a single correct moment to act. Nobody would call the sniper undisciplined for the 11 hours of stillness. The stillness is the discipline. It's the exact same principle sitting underneath a trading account, just without anyone framing it that way. Because wait quietly for hours doesn't make for compelling content the way "Here's How I Caught This Huge Move" does. Think about a lifeguard on a quiet beach. Most of the job, hour after hour, is scanning water where nothing is happening. A good lifeguard doesn't manufacture a rescue to feel useful during the slow stretch. They sit, they watch, they stay ready, and the actual skill shows up in the rare moment it's genuinely needed. A bad lifeguard, uncomfortable with the stillness, starts wandering, gets distracted, or starts overreacting to normal waves just to feel like they're doing something. Trading works the same way. The setup you're actually paid to catch might show up twice this week. Everything in between is water where nothing is happening, and your entire job during that time is simply to keep watching without inventing a rescue. So let's go back to David and Karen. David, roughly a year later, had rebuilt his approach almost entirely around this idea. after finally tracing his losses back not to bad setups, but to the sheer volume of unnecessary ones. He deleted 8 of his 11 indicators. He started using alerts instead of constant screen watching. It wasn't comfortable at first. He described the first few weeks as agony, sitting through quiet sessions that used to be filled with clicking and scanning. But 6 months into the new approach, his impulse trade count had dropped by more than 80%, and his account, for the first time in over a year, was actually growing instead of quietly leaking. Karen, meanwhile, kept doing exactly what she'd always done. Check the levels. Wait, close the platform if nothing had happened. Her account kept its same slow, unremarkable upward line, the kind of chart that would never make an exciting screenshot. Because there was never anything exciting to screenshot. That was, and remains, the entire point. Here's the choice in front of you, and it's genuinely this simple. You can keep treating boredom as a problem to be solved with clicks, new indicators, or extra trades, chasing a feeling of engagement that has nothing to do with whether the trade in front of you is actually good. Or you can start treating boredom as evidence that your criteria are tight, that you're not forcing anything, and that your capital is sitting quietly, protected, waiting for the rare moments that actually deserve it. The traders still standing in 10 years aren't the ones who found trading the most thrilling. They're the ones who made peace with how much of trading is simply sitting still. Learn to tolerate the boredom, and you give your edge the one thing it actually needs to prove itself: enough undisturbed time to work.